My mother died on a Tuesday at Providence Medical Center, and the hallway smelled like bleach and endings. By Friday, my husband was asking where she kept her jewelry and important papers in her Portland bungalow. Grief makes the world blurry, but greed brings everything into focus like a knife against glass. He said he was helping, labeling boxes, drafting lists, keeping me from overthinking details. I kept hearing my mother's last whisper, "Be careful who you trust, darling. Trust is a door and a lock." He drove us home down Burnside with the windows cracked and a sermon about fresh starts. I watched his hands on the wheel and imagined them emptying my mother's drawers without blinking. At the stoplight, he Googled estate timelines like someone checking a dinner reservation. I stared at my reflection in the window and barely recognized the woman swallowing storms. Somewhere in that reflection, I saw my mother's eyes telling me to stay very, very still. The house was too quiet, as if even the picture frames were holding their breath. He opened a notebook and wrote assets, underlining it like a schoolboy hungry for gold stars. I brewed tea because hot water was the only thing I could control without shattering. He asked about safety deposit keys and passwords he'd never cared to remember. I told him I didn't know, but the truth was I feared she'd hidden more than silver. At night, I lay awake and counted the seconds between his sighs and his notifications. He had changed his phone's passcode the week Mom went into hospice, subtle and sudden. He kept it face down like a secret he was nursing back to health. Every vibration felt like a message from a life that did not include me. When I finally slept, I dreamed of a door with my mother's name carved into the lock. The morning after the funeral, a letter arrived from a law firm on S.W. Morrison Street. Black envelope, my name in her looping script that always calmed storms in my chest. He reached for it first, and I moved faster than grief had allowed in days. I slipped the envelope into my coat pocket and felt the paper breathe. My mother had left me something, and I didn't know whether to fear it or kneel. He suggested we visit a trusted buyer in the Pearl District to appraise her rings. He said sentiment was beautiful, but liquidity was wiser in times like these. I heard the word liquidity and tasted iron, like biting my own tongue to stay quiet. I told him my mother wore memory like gold, and memory wasn't for sale. He smiled the way men smile when they plan to win later. Not now. I drove to the bungalow alone and sat on her floral couch like a child in church. The afternoon light crossed the carpet in slow, forgiving bands of gold. Her robe still hung on the door, a soft ghost guarding the hallway from strangers. I opened the letter with hands that wanted to tremble but refused the indulgence. Inside was only a single line, "See Matthews, and bring no one." Robert Matthews had known my mother for 20 years, and carried grief like a gentleman. He offered tea I did not drink, and patience I drank like rain. "There are provisions," he said, and the word felt like a hand on my shoulder. He opened a thin file, then closed it, studying my face like a clock. "Your mother loved you fiercely, Amanda, and she planned for storms." Back home, my husband had printed estate checklist in bold and taped it to the fridge. He'd highlighted categories: valuables, accounts, property, timelines, distributions, taxes. I stared at the list and thought of my mother's apricot jam recipe card. Both lists measured a life, but only one tasted like summer and safety. He asked what the lawyer said, and I said that she loved me. He didn't sleep beside me that night. He slept beside the numbers. His laptop glowed like an altar where he prayed to his future. I lay awake counting the ways a heart can close itself to survive. In the dark, I pressed the envelope to my chest, like a relic. I whispered, "I'm listening, Mom," and the silence answered back. "Good." Matthews called at 9 sharp with a voice that respected thresholds and truth. "Amanda, your mother established a living trust. I need you to come alone." Alone felt like a cliff, but my mother had always taught me edges. I arrived to rain-spotted windows and a pen that seemed heavier than ink. He placed a notarized binder between us like a map through a minefield. "Your mother funded the trust with her investments, the house, and insurance. Distribution is conditional, based on relationship status and time," he said carefully. "If you are unmarried, funds release after a 1-year stability period. If married at her death, the trust releases only after a finalized divorce plus 6 months single." My breath stopped, then remembered itself and found a slower road back. "She anticipated pressure, so access is through an individual account in your name. She left a letter to be read only if certain events occur. he added. What events? I asked, and my voice sounded like someone else's resolve. If a spouse files for divorce or credible evidence of adultery arises, he said. I heard the hinge of a door swing in an empty house inside me. He slid a smaller sealed envelope toward me, marked, "Only if needed." The weight of it felt like a secret braided with mercy and fire. She also stored documents in a bank box on any Broadway, he said. Keys? I asked, already reaching for a memory I didn't own. In the lining of her blue coat, he said, and smiled at her genius. I thanked him and walked into a Portland drizzle that blessed the sidewalks. Cars hissed by and each tire sounded like a warning turning into wisdom. I drove to the bungalow and found the blue coat where she always left it. The key was stitched under the hem, tender as a mother's hand. I whispered, "You were always one step ahead," and the house exhaled. The bank vault was colder than grief, and quieter than midnight prayers. I opened the box and found folders labeled like chapters she refused to leave unwritten. Accounts, home, insurance, for Amanda's heart, and if he shows his teeth. I reached for the last one because survival always knows its own name. Inside, a flash drive, receipts, and a handwritten note with steady blue ink. "My girl," the note began, and my ribs turned into open windows. "If you are holding this, it means pressure has come to your door. Do not argue with wolves. Follow the path I've marked in moonlight. There is a plan for your freedom and a plan for your healing. Trust the plan, and trust the woman you become along the way." Back at home, I asked him to make soup, and he smiled with relief. He liked a task when a truth was in the room he couldn't see. While he chopped carrots, I plugged the flash drive into my laptop. Folders opened like eyes. Screenshots, statements, and a timeline in neat columns. Dates, hotel charges, ride shares at midnight, flowers billed to our joint card. The name Rachel appeared like a stain that refused to fade. Work trips to Seattle that ended at a boutique hotel in Lake Union. Texts recovered from cloud backups my mother somehow obtained and saved. "Can't wait to be free," he'd written, as if marriage were a cell. "Soon," she replied, and I felt my mother's hand hold mine steady. I closed the laptop and breathed until the world found its edges again. In the kitchen, he set the bowls down like an offering to normal. "What are you thinking?" he asked, searching my face for surrender. I said I was thinking of my mother's recipe and how it never failed. He smiled, finally comfortable, and I swallowed a storm without choking. After dinner, I returned the files to the bank box and locked the door. I didn't confront him. I honored the woman who taught me timing. I walked outside and let the wet night press its cool hand to my cheeks. In the reflection of the window, I saw not a widow, but a witness. Somewhere, my mother's letter waited, and I was finally ready to read. I read the second letter at the dining table where birthdays used to bloom. "Amanda," she wrote, "if you find proof of disloyalty, do not shrink. Shrinkage is what grief does. Courage is what we do back to grief. Call Matthews and follow the divorce protocol in Section 7. Then step outside and breathe. The sky is an altar you can trust." At dawn, I drove to Cary Park in Seattle with a camera and a purpose. He thought I was visiting a friend. I was visiting the truth. I watched him exit a rideshare and cradle Rachel's face like a prize. They walked into the same boutique hotel from the statements and screenshots. I took 3 photos, and a breath that tasted like iron turning into light. When he returned home Sunday night, he kissed my forehead like a ritual. He told me the seminar went well and networking had been promising. I asked if he learned anything new about integrity, and he blinked. He talked about market shifts and timing like a man reciting scripture. I nodded like a woman memorizing the final lines of a play. I showered with the water too hot, and the truth hotter still. In the steam, I practiced the words I would not say yet. I heard my mother say, "You do not negotiate with a hurricane. You board the windows, you gather the documents, and you wait." I stepped out new-skinned and reached for my phone without shaking. That night, I sent the photos and records to Matthews with a subject line. Per instructions. Credible evidence obtained. Proceeding per trust protocol. He replied within the hour. Precise and steady as a lighthouse. Understood. Drafting initial filings. Do not alert him until I advise. I turned off the lamp and lay in the dark, grateful for choreography. Morning came dressed as a test, and I passed by making coffee in silence. He asked about my plans, mapping his day around my vulnerability. I said I had errands and kissed his cheek like a closing ceremony. I drove to the courthouse, where fluorescent lights hum like necessary angels. Matthews met me with documents that felt like the spine of a future. He explained the trust again, this time like a battle plan I could carry. Finalized divorce, then 6 months single, then full release, he said. Funds never enter marital property. They remain in the trust until conditions. He handed me a declaration of separate property and a restraining clause. Think of this as a seatbelt, he added, and I finally exhaled. We opened a new account at a credit union my mother had chosen. My name only, linked to the trust, quiet as a secret cathedral. He placed a card in my palm like a passport into my own life. No joint mail, no notifications to the shared address, he cautioned. I nodded, thinking of wolves and windows and the taste of rain. At the bank, I returned to the vault and added new pages to the box. Photocopies, timestamps, an index my mother would have praised. I held her first letter again and felt the paper pulse with faith. She had anticipated not just his greed, but my need for structure. She had built me a bridge sturdy enough to cross while shaking. When I got home, he was giddy about a new opportunity by the marina. He said partners were ready. They just needed a modest infusion. I asked how modest, and he said the number like a dare. I smiled the way my mother would smile at a man chasing fireworks. Modest is a word that buys boats, I said, and set the table. The confrontation came not with shouting, but with the sound of paper. He had printed projections and circled numbers in a fever of entitlement. I'll handle everything, he said, the same way men promise a storm will pass. I set my own papers down. The trust summary, the clauses, the timelines. He scanned the page, and I watched recognition crawl across his face. What is this? He asked, as if language had betrayed him at last. It's my mother's love letter written in law, I said, steady as salt. The inheritance is not marital property until I am free and still. Divorce first, then 6 months single, then release, I continued. If I remain married, it goes to a veteran's charity in her name. He laughed, a dry sound like old leaves crushed under a bad idea. That's insane, he said, already searching for loopholes with his eyes. It's airtight, I replied, remembering Matthew's careful, quiet voice. She planned with witnesses, evaluations, and independent counsel documented. Contesting it would only prove what you've already proven in private. He tried tenderness next, the emergency exit men choose when power fails. Baby, we're grieving, he said, reaching for a script that used to work. I made mistakes, but we can fix us if we stick together. I watched his pupils for the flicker of numbers behind the apology. I saw math, not love, and my mother's letters burned like dawn. I told him I had retained counsel and would prefer cooperation. No yelling, no courtroom theater, just signatures and a clean line. He paced the kitchen like a caged promise and knocked into the chair. After all I've invested, he muttered, and the word invested broke. He wasn't losing a wife. He was losing a business plan with my name. That night, I slept for the first time since Tuesday with the windows open. The city breathed, and I breathed back, finally on the same rhythm. I dreamt of my mother knitting a red thread through a steel door. When I woke, the thread was in my chest, warm and unbreakable. The trap was perfect because it wasn't a trap. It was a key. The papers arrived on a rainy Thursday, the kind of Portland rain that never truly stops. I signed my name slowly, the ink trembling with both fear and relief. Matthews said, "This is closure and progress," and I nodded like someone learning to breathe. Julio didn't fight. He simply looked at me as if I'd broken a spell. But the truth was, the spell had already been broken. By honesty, not hate. At the courthouse, the echo of footsteps became my new anthem of independence. He tried to speak, to apologize, but his words were built from yesterday's lies. I walked away, umbrella open, feeling my mother's presence in every drop that fell. Freedom, I learned, doesn't shout. It hums quietly beneath your ribs. That hum carried me home, stronger than any promise ever could. That night, I stood before the mirror and saw someone I almost recognized. Not the grieving daughter or the betrayed wife, but a woman growing into her own skin. The apartment felt lighter, like even the walls had been waiting for this. I made tea and played her favorite jazz record, letting the trumpet rewrite my pulse. When the final note faded, I whispered, We did it, Mom. We made it. Over the next weeks, I began untangling the invisible threads he'd left behind. Passwords, bills, reminders of shared dreams now archived and deleted. Each task felt like cleaning out a wound so it could finally heal. The pain was still there, but it no longer ruled me. It taught me. My mother had given me more than protection. She'd given me a second beginning. On the morning the divorce finalized, I went to the coast alone. The ocean roared like a teacher, fierce but forgiving. I scattered a handful of wildflowers into the waves, for endings and beginnings both. Behind me, gulls cried. Before me, the horizon stretched like a vow. And for the first time in years, I felt at home inside myself. 6 months passed like a gentle storm, reshaping everything without breaking me. Matthews called one morning with a smile I could hear through the phone. "Amanda, congratulations. You've met every condition of the trust." I closed my eyes and felt my mother's hand on my shoulder again. Freedom, it seemed, was something she'd timed perfectly. At the office, I signed the final documents with steady hands. $850,000 transferred into an account under my name. No strings, no shadows. I thought I'd feel rich, but instead, I felt peaceful and light. The money wasn't a prize. It was a bridge toward the woman my mother believed I'd become, and I was finally ready to cross it without fear. The first thing I did was donate a portion to the Veterans Foundation, the same charity my mother had chosen as the trust's safeguard of truth. It felt like closing a circle she had drawn years before. Her plan wasn't just about protecting assets. It was about protecting my soul. She'd made sure kindness would always outlive loss. I sold the apartment filled with echoes and moved toward salt and sky. Manzanita called to me like an old lullaby I'd forgotten I knew. A small cottage near the beach became my sanctuary, simple and sunlit. Every window opened to ocean air that smelled like